Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and it's my pleasure and privilege to be speaking to the iconic Shobhaa Day, and I hope we have an engaging discussion and that you all enjoy it. So, Shobha, I would like to start with the disclaimer that you have in your book. In the beginning, where you say that you're not going to be profound, pedantic, and pretentious, which you definitely are not. And a few lines before that, you describe yourself as vagabond, loafer, gypsy, and a warrior. So, what I would like to ask you is, after 75 years of living the good life, would you tell us in some detail why you chose these 4 words to describe you?
Thank you. To start with, Namaskaram. What a crowd! What a crowd! Thank you so very much for being here. It's been, for me, years of coming to KLF, and I'd like to say this with complete sincerity. This is perhaps the greatest beach lit fest in the world. The readers, the response, an informed audience, the energy you get from the stage. People who read and are there because they respect writers. Because without readers, we are nothing. Without all of you supporting all of us, there's nothing. We are grains of sand. So thank you so very much, year after year, Ravi DC, all the organizers, for inviting me so regularly, and for all of you here on a very hot Sunday afternoon to be here and listen to Divya and me in conversation about my new book, which is called Insatiable, My Hunger for Life. She's described 4 words which I have written in the book right at the start, describing myself as a vagabond, a gypsy, a loafer, and a voyeur. At 75, I can happily claim each and every one of those descriptions, because that's what's kept me curious, kept me alive, kept me going, given me the energy to keep doing what I've done for the last 50 uninterrupted years of writing professionally. So 5 decades of writing, and now in a book which is really about 365 days, 12 months, 300 pages, and 75 years, which is the new title. So thank you for that introduction.
So, this book, while it talks about Shobha's life in the year leading up to her 75th birthday, it describes very beautifully how food can connect people from different backgrounds, people from different geographies, and you can find a very strong connection through food. And Shobha very beautifully describes this chapter after chapter. So, and she also describes how her own relationship with food, like she would say that she has the habit of hoarding boxes or bottles of kasundi whenever she's in Kerala, whenever she's in Kolkata, or asking the chef at Umaid Bhavan for chili so that she can prepare lal mas. So what I wanted to ask you is, what has your relationship with food been like over the years, and how has it changed as you've aged?
I, first of all, believe that food is something so primal. Hunger is something so primal. We don't acknowledge the importance of food in our lives. We tend to take it for granted. We undermine it. We just think of it as one meal to the next meal. But at the end of it all, food is something that is very emotional. Food is something that keeps families together, that friends bond over, that strangers bond over. For example, I'd love to ask all of you, if you're sitting at a table with strangers, or you could be in a railway compartment or on a plane, and the person next to you opens up his tiffin, don't you always stare and wonder what is that person going to eat? We all do it. It's very human. I'm always staring at what people are eating, and I'm always curious to watch how people eat. Because watching people eat gives you a very, very good idea about that person. People who eat indifferently while they're on their phone or something else are generally not very sensitized to the joy and pleasure of eating. And the joy and pleasure of eating is something very basic. Hunger is something very basic. I mean, a baby is born into the world hungry, and a mother nurtures and feeds, and the baby grows up, not just on mother's milk alone, but yes, that is the first connect and the first contact. So food, I don't take food lightly at all. I enjoy every meal of mine, and I often tell people that you don't have to be a glutton to enjoy food. You can enjoy, like I've just had Paragon biryani before coming on stage, but it doesn't mean that I have to eat one big dekchi full of it to appreciate what's gone into it. There is something called the poetry of food, which the Paragon tagline said, which I thought was so beautiful. So if I come here to this city, there's no question that I won't want to taste local food. And last night I had beetroot toran. And I've also told the chef to make me kapan biryani tonight because I hadn't tasted it earlier. So food is adventure. Food is something that you can never ever say, I've tasted everything in the world, because that's not possible. And the joy that shared food gives, the kind of love and bonding that takes place, the conversations that take place over food remain unbeatable for me.
Yeah. Like you were telling me over lunch some time ago that you can never understand how someone can be detached from the food that they eat or not too involved with what's on their plate. And as she writes in the book, she can figure out a person's Janam Kundli just by looking at what they eat and, you know, their relationship with the food on their plate.
But I also have to specify, because a lot of people, including the book designers, initially thought it's a book of recipes, or it's a book devoted to food. It is not. It is a book that uses food as a metaphor for our life. Food as something that brings us joy, and if we are deprived of it, it brings a deep longing for just satiation. You know, a lot of people, the hungry of the world, can only think of food to survive. So food is something we must pay a little more attention to. It's more, for me, the book is philosophical. It's looking over 12 months coming out of COVID, coming out of a great deal of introspection, a great deal of shedding of emotions, deep search for what is actually at 75 important to me, my family, what I feel about loneliness, what I feel about rejection. Do I still seek validation? Do I still seek approval from my readers? Does each book, each column still make me nervous and edgy? And I think a lot of those answers came to me because post-COVID and during COVID, I gave myself that time. I gave myself enough time with myself. And though in those 2 years, which were difficult for the whole world, where we didn't know whether we would even wake up alive, I did manage to write, in a complete state of panic, a book called Lockdown Liaisons, which is 26 stories inspired by COVID, written during the pandemic and published during the pandemic, and now being performed as a series of plays by Lilette Dubé across India. And I also managed to finish a novel, and I managed to do 50 videos back to back every single day during the worst period of COVID, not for any other reason, but to keep myself going so that I wasn't pulled into depression. And each video was a cheerful 2-minute, 3-minute video where I took the trouble to actually dress up, make a comment on maybe whatever news was trickling in, but they were not morbid videos. They weren't only talking about death and devastation or infections or which vaccine works or which doesn't, and how many people we have lost. And I lost a great many people who I love very much, also parents of friends. It was to get out of that I did these videos. And they kept me going. And at the end of each video, I made a complete fool of myself, singing a little song. Sometimes I didn't even know the words of that song. It would end with a song. And initially everyone said to me that you can't sing for nuts, why are you doing this? I said to actually bring a smile to my own face. And soon I discovered that the viewers were responding to those songs and they were sending me songs to sing and was bringing a smile to their face. So it wasn't completely a lost cause. Of course, I've not dared to sing after that. But I think each one of us tried to hang on to something during those 2 very difficult years that kept our hope alive, that kept belief alive, that kept even our emotional selves intact. This was my coping mechanism. Otherwise, I was going into panic like millions of people across the world.
That brings me to the point that, okay, when you, as a writer, when you were writing something in the middle of the lockdown, I mean, this book is something that you started in 2021. And that was also, we were still in the throes of COVID and we were just sort of coming out of it. How has that changed you as a writer? Has the experience of COVID being detached from everyone changed the way you write or the way you approach a subject or the way you sort of observe and look at people around you, which you also love to do? So,
I would say what it really drove home very strongly is the fragility of our lives, the fragility of existence, and that we can't take anyone or anything in our lives for granted, not even our own life. And I think it's just made me a better person. I'm just more compassionate and sensitized to the frailty of life itself, of existence. It's made me a kinder person. I'm less judgmental. So the book, when I wrote it, and there were expectations that I would do a kind of a Harry and His Spare, the book which is breaking records across the world. And I really felt very strongly that if you want to sell your books at the cost of shredding reputations of your family members and those who you claim to have loved in the past, and all you're going to do is write a very negative tell-all book with very personal details, I found it exploitative, and I still find it repulsive that any writer would stoop to that. So I was very, very clear that that's not the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book that was positive and made me feel good and made the people reading that book feel good and think a little deeply maybe about their own lives. And there are life lessons in there, but it's not a book that is written from the perspective of a 75-year-old passing down some kind of received wisdom, because at the end of it all, we are all fools, we really are. And we are children. And it's an illusion or a delusion that you think age makes you wise. It absolutely does not. It only teaches you how little you know, and how those 75 years are not even the beginning of a self journey. And whatever years are left, make the most of them to enrich yourself, enrich the family, the people you love around you, and stop thinking of yourself as some wise old person. Because like they say sometimes, old is gold. Very often it's not. Old is mold. And it's a harsh reality that most of us would like to deny and keep talking about the golden age, golden years, platinum years. Well, it's a nice romantic way of looking at age, but age is cruel and it is very demanding. So I do not either romanticize my 75 years, I do not deny them, I am not ashamed of them, I am not terribly proud of them. I just accept them as a biological fact of life, which it is.
I want to touch upon the vulnerability that you also convey through this book. And mind you, like she said, if you read the book, you will know that it's all weaved in so subtly. Like you would talk about your visit to the neighborhood beauty parlor, and suddenly you have a conversation going about diversity, people from different backgrounds coming together. And then she would be talking about her birthday party with her friends, and then suddenly the conversation would shift to how the collective isolation that we all felt due to COVID-19 and the need to recognize the importance of our family and friends. And similarly, she also addresses a lot of issues like body positivity, etc. And why something that I particularly touched me is why we should never shy away from our tears. Neither we should never constrict our tears or tears of anyone else, and it's okay to cry. And in a society, particularly, even men, I guess, are said that tears are a sign of weakness. And can you elaborate on that?
Tears was something that I was almost conditioned to believe, that to cry, even as a child, was showing your deficiency, your weakness, and don't be a crybaby. I think we hear that a lot. We say it to our own children a lot. But tears are such a valid and needed emotional release, and we should never ever suppress them. I don't mean use tears as a weapon to get what you want, because some of us also do that. It's not about crying to prove a point or to be obstinate, not at all. But if something moves you, it could be something really small or something really big, and people around you discourage you from crying, which has happened to me a lot, especially as an adult, and especially with people who have a certain preconceived idea of me being some kind of a superwoman, someone so strong, someone who can't possibly be crying, who can't possibly be weak enough to be emotional mush, who can't be manipulated, who can't get hurt. I mean, every single one of us should be in charge of our own emotional vulnerabilities. We should own our own emotions. And if we want to cry, we should cry without any shame of judgment. But a lot of us don't, because society disapproves so strongly, especially of women of a certain category who they feel have such a privileged life, and what is there to cry about? How would anyone know anyone else's life? You really never do. So it's always presumptuous. It's an assumption that what you see, you perceive as the truth, and you're ready to judge someone based on nothing but that perception. So my tears freed me. They really released me from self-consciousness and feeling ashamed that I should never be seen crying. Now I cry, I think, a bit too easily, or so my children tell me, but let them deal with it. It's their problem, not mine.
One thing that I found very interesting is that the Shobhaa Day that we know as members of the public is someone who always speaks her mind, who sort of, as you even say in your book, you don't watch your words and, things like that. But there is another interesting line in your book wherein you talk about protecting your peace, and you say that keeping mum is not a compromise, it's a tactic. So can you talk about that? Like, what kind of, it's a tactic. Yeah. Keeping mum is not a compromise, it's a tactic.
Well, silence is often used as a tactic. In today's political environment, silence is something that is a shield. And I know, having paid the price for my political views in the public domain, and attempts to silence me, at what price that silence, actually what it extracts from people who are writing in a public space. Silence has never been an option for me, and I'm happy to pay the price, whatever that may involve, and have always done so. But increasingly, I find in the media, uh, a lot of my editors are very nervous. There are subtle suggestions about not saying something too strong. Now, I don't understand that. Who qualifies, who quantifies what is too strong, what is not that strong, what is palatable? Truth is never palatable in a political environment such as ours. It's not palatable. Those who can't swallow it, it is not my problem to take care of their digestion. It is my job to speak the truth. And that's what I think any writer in the world should take as a birthright and not be constrained or in any way made to feel apologetic for anything that they believe in, which they're sharing with their readers, many of whom may share that view, many of whom may not. But dissent is the most powerful word in a democracy. The day we lose track of that word, what are we? We are puppets. I wrote a column last week, which was thankfully, mercifully published without a single word being changed, which is how it should be. It was called, "We Have Become a Nation of Darpokes, of Cowards." And how every one of us is constantly looking over our shoulders to see who's listening, who's going to be, telling tales on you, including your closest friends who may have switched political platforms, suddenly no longer want to be with you. They don't want to be your friends, which is fine by me. If you don't share values with your friends, if you do not have a belief system that you can be proud of, then they're not your friends to start with. So I've done a lot of shedding this year, and some of them may be very glad to get rid of me from their lives, but I'm equally glad not to call them my friends. To speak up is something which is absolutely our birthright, and we should never lose sight of that one single reality, particularly if we are to call ourselves a democracy, which so far, technically, on paper and by the Constitution, we still are.
You know, that raises a very important point that brings me to my next question. You've had a very interesting and adventurous career as a writer, editor, and columnist, from treason to contempt. You've seen it all. And as you mentioned, there is a certain hesitation, there's a certain fear, both in media and publishing, perhaps, around freedom of expression and allowing people to say something or allowing scope for dissent. How do you manage to retain your authenticity despite all that? And I'm sure there must be many young writers in this crowd who would want to know how they can do that.
Freedom of expression itself has become almost like an insult in this environment. And the minute you bring up that expression in your writing or talk about it or tweet about it, immediately the troll armies slam you and call you an anti-national, prostitute, and worse, paid agent, all kinds of things. Well, you simply have to find your spine and stand up for what you believe in. All the young writers there, don't ever forget you're born with a strong spine and a conscience and a mind of your own. And why should anyone compromise or try and get you to stoop because of whatever retribution? If you're going to fear retribution, you're in the wrong business. If you're in the business of being in journalism or being a columnist or being a writer, that word retribution should never ever scare you, no matter what the price you have to pay, including perhaps with your life. A lot of writers have paid that price. And those of us who are there because they gave up their life. And we can never forget that. And we cannot turn our backs on them. And we cannot stop feeling and expressing what we feel. Because it is very, very important. The minute that front line surrenders, we are gone. We are gone. And that front line can never surrender. And that is the courage I would want to give all the young writers here today. That don't give up. This is not the time to give up. This is the time to fight on.
In fact, that in your line, you mention how your kids might or might not read your books, but would definitely monitor your social media posts, because in this day and age where there are trolls, where there is cancel culture, and social media can be a very hard place to be in. It can take a toll on you. So I'm sure that standing by what you say is easier said than done, right?
Well, social media is the beast we all have to live with. We can't wish it away. It is there, and you cannot tame it. So you learned to use it without the social media aspect of it being on top of you. You cannot let the beast devour you. You be on top of what you wish to say. You be the person who cuts the image the way you want to. If the social media imaging or the trolling gets to you, then you should either quit the game completely, which I don't think any public person can afford to, or you learn not to let it get to you. And I found out very early when I started tweeting, and I was one of the most trolled women in Asia at the time, that if you play into it, the monster is going to eat you up. If you ignore anonymity, which is really what it is, it's just a lot of cowards out there trying to pull you down. A lot of it is organized troll armies by political parties. If you're going to let that affect you and engage with cowards who are nameless, then a lot of your energy is going to be dissipated in engaging in a useless one-sided war, which you cannot win. So just tweet and be damned has been my aptitude. And yes, I have been damned enough, but I can handle it. I can handle it.
I think particularly for women, it's a very difficult space to be in. You've had your share of sexism and patriarchal related comments on social media. But what I'd like to know is that, your book that you wrote when you turned 70, and you said that, to hell with it, I don't give a damn. So does that happen as you grow older, that
With social media being what it is, I mean, I get possibly 10 rape threats a day. There are people who put me on all kinds of lists saying that they're going to come after me. There was a list published with on Facebook, identified, the person was identifying himself. This was right after Gauri Lankesh. And he said there were 5 women in India who they were going to go after with serial assassinations. Nothing happened to the person. The person was not arrested, was not challenged in any way by any court, nothing. And to be on such a list sometimes makes my family quite nervous. I have been under police protection for 2.5 years for a tweet that was clearly not understood or deliberately not understood. But that's part of, it goes with the territory. You cannot want the upside and say, I will not handle the downside. It's a package. You are there, you're expressing your opinions. Expect a strong response. If the response is not life-threatening, which it can be too, well, just count each day and do your job as it comes.
So before we open the panel out to audience questions, I want to ask you, Shobhaa, that if there is one key takeaway that you would want the readers to have out of this book, what would that be?
I'm often asked questions about legacy, which I find a particularly obnoxious, pompous word. Legacy is not in any writer's hand. It's not in any creative person's hand. It's how perhaps you're judged by future generations. And I'm not one of those people who have a ready message to give to the world. I think it's very important for all of us to believe in your own truth and abide by that and live by that. And that's about it. But I cannot presume to tell other people how they should lead their lives. Because if there was one thing I resented as a young person, it was older people telling me how to lead my life. I pretty much did it the way I wanted to. And I would tell every young person in this room, do exactly what you want to and take what comes with it, because that's the fun and adventure of life.
So you have never thought about legacy? That is never, even for fun. So now we open this out to the audience. Anyone who would like to ask a question, can we have the mic over? Oh, there's a woman there.
Hello. Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. It's a privilege for me to meet you finally. I'm a huge fan of your writing from my teenage onwards. And I'm very much inspired by you for your fearlessness and your unfiltered women characters in almost all your novels. And my question is that, why do you put Bombay as the background to almost many of your novels? Bombay city is there, and many events are happening in that particular city. Why have you chosen that?
Bombay is like a character in my book. To me, it's very palpable, it's very alive. It is the city that has allowed me to be me. I don't think any other city in India would have tolerated me, quite honestly. So I really owe Bombay a lot. My formative years, the friends I made, the area in which I grew up, my college years, my school years, everything that defines me today has been thanks to the very progressive, very liberal Bombay when I was growing up. Of course, it's no longer the same Mumbai, but which city is the same anymore? So definitely, it's a city which will keep coming up in all my books. Also, I haven't lived long enough in other cities. I'm just about getting to know Pune very closely, and I'm finding a huge connect to Pune. Being a Maharashtrian myself, I am maybe reconnecting to one area of my childhood which was lost for many years. But Bombay will continue to dominate my imagination because it is a city that inspires me greatly in the past and will continue to.
You know, that question really raised an important point about the female characters in your book. I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, all of them, I think they sort of use the cards that they've been dealt with in life, and, you know, have the women in your books. I mean,
it was not really a conscious decision for me to stick to only women protagonists when I started writing, but I have gravitated quite naturally and organically. My lead characters are always, but always women. It's something I feel passionately about. And like someone pointed out to me, a critic quite recently, that when the first novel came out more than 30 years ago, all the novels actually had only male protagonists. Women were secondary characters. They were never at the center of the novel, especially in Indian writers writing in English. I'm not talking about the regional writers. There have always been very strong, powerful characters in Malayalam, for example, in Marathi, in Bengali. And women have been at the centerpiece of poetry and fiction, certainly in these three states that I know about. But for Indian writers writing in English, it was very, very strongly male-dominated, and women's voices were not even heard. Forget about being at the center of the narrative. So it was important for me to speak up on behalf of women, and I'm glad I did, because those women were really what in only a Bombaya term can describe. They were bindas women, or to use current terminology, they were badass women who did what they wanted to. They took ownership of their lives, their sexuality, their bodies, their thinking, their pleasures, their sorrows. And I'm glad that it turned out the way it has, looking back over 35 years of writing about women. And it wasn't particularly like a feminist statement that was being made. It was what I felt, and I continue to feel, and I will continue to write about women and for women till I'm a writer, which I hope it will be till my last breath.
Is there a character that you identify with more than others from your own books?
Character in my book.
Yeah, is there a female character that you identify with more than others?
Not any one specific character, because they've all been very distinct, very different. But the first book always remains special, I think, for most novelists. So I would say Karuna in Socialite Evenings was a fairly true representation of who I am. And so Karuna, yes, if I had to pick one.
Yes, going back to the woman
questions
there.
From that side.
Yeah.
Can someone take the mic there? Oh, we have a mic. Yeah.
Yeah. Shobhaaji, greetings from Kozhikode. My question is not about food or literature or anything. Am I audible?
If you hold it closer to your mouth, I can hear you better.
Yeah. My question is not about food or politics, sorry, literature or anything. It's about politics. Shobhaaji, you were born into a young, independent India, and which was so liberal and so progressive.
Proposing him as an alternative, not at all. You should read that column carefully. What it says is, what he has attempted, the Bharat Jodo Yatra, no one has done it in the last 20 years. We all talk from our drawing rooms, but he's actually walking the talk. I admire him for that. He has set an inspiring example. There is no hate, there is no divisiveness in what he's saying. It's a very positive message that he's sending out. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But it does not mean that I automatically think he should be the next Prime Minister. It means he is a symbol of very powerful and very peaceful dissent against what is happening in our country. There's no place for hate. So any person who has chosen to become a symbol of that kind and face a lot of danger, personal danger to himself too, deserves our admiration. As citizens, we should support someone doing something instead of creating hate. That's what all I meant.
Okay, I have a question. When you talk about people being cowardly, does it not, I mean, is it not a little, is it not inaccurate to compare your circumstances where you can speak up with somebody whose circumstances in a different town, not economically independent? You can be brave and speak out in different varying degrees, in different places. Do you think it's right to have one standard of bravery?
I'm sorry, I haven't understood your question. If you could just make it very short and specific.
No, when you talk about being cowardly and not speaking up.
Cowardly, being cowardly.
Yeah,
yes.
You just now said, is it not easier for someone with economic freedom in a big city to be openly, to dissent openly, rather than someone who might be in a different set of circumstances?
What I understood from your question is that something about being cowardly and dissent. Not everybody can be an activist. I'm not an activist. I just do my job the best I can. But we all have a conscience. Every citizen has a conscience. And if we see gross injustice as human beings, as citizens, we should be speaking up to help our fellow beings. That has nothing to do with being cowardly or not. It's got to do with being human and feeling deeply about things that are happening around you which are clearly wrong. And there are people and communities being targeted which has never happened in independent India on this scale. There are people being marginalized and thrown out of the mainstream. And there are specific individuals, especially in the arts, who are being singled out and victimized and persecuted. That is wrong by any standards. And if we keep quiet, tomorrow the same people will be after you and there'll be no one to stand up for you. So standing up for people who don't have a voice is something as human beings, as citizens, we absolutely must do. You don't have to be a warrior to do it. You just have to have the courage of your own convictions in very simple everyday acts. You don't have to take to the streets. You don't have to pelt stones on anyone. Don't do anything that's destructive. Just have a positive point of view and be helpful to your fellow beings. That's it. And protest because you have the absolute right to protest peacefully. That is your right and you must.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So I'm actually a fan of your novel, Socialite Evenings. I really like the character of Karuna. Like, I felt like I could connect a lot with her. Like, she's someone who is from a conservative middle-class family, but she has a lot of ambitions to go further than that. But one thing I felt about the novel was that the character of Karuna, there are times when she's a bit judgmental of there's this character whom she kind of slut shames, and she's a bit judgmental of that particular character. So why is she never like called out by the narrative for that?
I think we all have so many contradictions, and especially when you're young and maybe caught up in a loveless marriage, and there are expectations from your extended family to conform, to be a certain way. You're exposed to a world you've never been exposed to earlier, previously. Those contradictions do surface and they do affect relationships. Sometimes they impact the relationship in a very negative way, but that's life. Not every relationship pans out the way you'd like it to, or in an ideal friendship graph, which can sometimes go wrong. I just said in an interview yesterday that the pandemic, if it taught us one thing, it's that so many of our relationships are like ticking time bombs. And you never know when that relationship may explode and take you down and destroy you and destroy the other person. So if you can hear that tick, 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 just step away. Step away because it can only be destructive.
All right. I think that's a wrap for us, and it's been an amazing session. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience, and thank you so much, Shobhaa.